Tonight on Reporting Scotland, the country's biggest teaching union calls for pay to be restored to pre-austerity levels and warns it might consider industrial action. Disposable coffee cups make up almost 10% of roadside litter. Now there are proposals to impose a 25% levy on them.
The main goal, of course, is to make us all change our behaviour. So instead of getting our coffee in something like this, we should remember to bring our own cup, which of course could be cheaper for us and for the environment.
Also on the programme, tackling the erosion of our coastline. Researchers investigate the impact of climate change on the country's most vulnerable areas. It was Scotland's worst environmental disaster. 25 years on, we remember the impact of the grounding of the Brer oil tanker. And as Celtic unveil their latest signing, we consider how easy it is for young players to make their mark. Good evening. Scotland's largest teachers' union says it's preparing to look at industrial action. The EIS is calling for pay to be restored to what it calls pre-austerity levels and says the 2% rise proposed by the Scottish Government for some other public sector workers won't be enough. The government says it wants what it describes as open negotiations on pay and conditions. Here's our education correspondent, Jamie McIver.
Well, I'm going to eat you up.
What price education? The government says education is its top priority. The biggest single cost which can be readily controlled is pay. And the largest teachers' union says pay hasn't kept up with inflation for several years. Now it wants a significant rise.
We have classrooms across the country which don't have qualified teachers in front of them. What we've said to the Scottish Government is we intend to campaign strongly this year for an above-inflation increase. We think teachers should be valued, not only as a profession, but also in terms of their salary.
We still don't know just how much the union will call for this year, but it'll certainly want more than the proposal in the Scottish budget covering many other public sector workers. Those earning more than £30,000 would get a 2% rise. Those earning less than that, 3%.
I acknowledge that over the course of the last few years there has been constraint on public sector pay which has affected teachers, which has been an inevitable consequence of the Tory government's austerity. What we now have the opportunity to do is to engage in an open negotiation around the terms and conditions of the teaching profession.
Teachers' pay has just gone up by 2%, but the union argues some would now be earning £3,500 more if wages had kept up with inflation since 2011. Talks are due to start soon, but in the distance lies a threat.
The unions say that 90% of their membership responded to the strike call throughout Scotland.
That's a threat of industrial action, even a strike. For those who remember the bitter teachers' dispute of the 1980s, that can send a chill. But industrial action of any sort remains a long way off. The question for now is whether the government and councils will play ball when it comes to teachers' pay claims. Jamie McIver, Reporting Scotland.
And Jamie's with me now. Let's just explore that question a bit more. Jamie, is it reasonable for teachers to say that they're a special case and therefore, by implication, deserving of a more than 2%?
It's an intriguing question, Sally, and it's always a real challenge because there are many in both the public and the private sectors whose wages haven't kept up with inflation in recent years. And the difficulty associated with giving a bigger rise to one particular group is that by doing so, others may in turn claim that they too deserve more. So in turn, that becomes inflationary almost. Now, I think the EIS would see the broad question of pay and conditions as part of the solution to the problems we've reported recently filling teacher vacancies in some parts of the country. There is that question of how to ensure that teachers remain within the profession, and there's also the question of how to persuade more people to go into teaching in the first place, into teacher training, especially in the fields like science and technology, where the best graduates can often have a number of careers to choose from. I certainly think there's genuine frustration within the profession over pay, but whether it will be possible to fund the kind of deal the EIS would like to see this year, well, that's a big issue to debate.
Jamie McIver, thank you very much. How will climate change damage Scotland's shoreline in the next 30 years? That's the focus of a study that will examine coastal erosion in vulnerable areas like the Montrose Basin and St Andrews. It's hoped the results will help local authorities understand how to mitigate the effects of rising sea levels. Our environment correspondent Keane has more.
On these islands, we live, work and play by the sea. Our cities are built around ports and much of our tourism is driven by the coast. But a fifth of Scotland's shoreline is at risk from erosion and rising sea levels.
What we've got here is a piece of shore protection that's been put in to restrict coastal erosion. Unfortunately, it's been ineffective, it's been overtopped and undermined.
Despite our best efforts, sea defences often struggle to hold back the destructive tide, and so new research is hoping to gain a better understanding of our shifting sands.
Because we know what's happening to the beach, we can identify whether the assets at the back of the beach are going to be under threat or not, and make decisions depending on whether we protect or whether we abandon.
When the infrastructure's undermined, communities can be left isolated. It cost the economy more than £1 billion when this line was out in Devon in 2014. And much of our rail infrastructure in Scotland sits close to the sea. You can't actually stop coastal erosion. All you're ever really doing is managing it. So if you build a defence like this, the energy from the sea is shifted, so it protects this part of the coastline, but it might create more erosion further down the way. Skara Brae in Orkney was essentially discovered because of coastal erosion. A storm washed away the sand which had kept it hidden. This is one of a handful of sites which will now be examined as part of the project.
There are some areas in Scotland where it is going to be a much more important issue to deal with in the shorter term. So what we're trying to do is to come up with real solutions that will help those communities.
So tough decisions ahead about what to save and what to sacrifice to the sea. Keane reporting Scotland, Montefieth.
Some GP practices in Lanarkshire are to open on Saturday mornings for the remainder of January because of exceptionally high levels of winter illness. NHS Lanarkshire says around 40% of the area's 104 GP practices would be open from tomorrow. That's from 8:30 to 12:30. Patients are advised to contact their local practice to check if it'll be open. The number of new cars being sold in Scotland fell by 20% in December compared to the same period last year. New figures show registrations dropped by 8% across the whole of 2017. That's higher than the UK average, which saw a fall of just under 6%, with an even steeper decrease in the sale of new diesels. A woman has appeared in court charged with murdering a man in Aberdeen. 65-year-old Alan Cowie's family say they've been left shocked and saddened by his sudden death. He was found dead at his home in the city's Tillydrone area on Wednesday. 52-year-old Sharon Massey, also known as Sharon Stewart, has also been charged with attempted murder and attempting to defeat the ends of justice. A former professor at Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh has appeared in court charged with 37 separate crimes, including sexual assault and indecent assault. 44-year-old Kevin O'Gorman made no plea at Edinburgh Sheriff Court. He was released on bail and will appear again in court at a later date. We use just over 200 million takeaway cups each year in Scotland. The vast majority are not recycled. Now, politicians are calling for a 25p tax on disposable cups, a so-called latte levy, with the money going towards improvements in recycling. Aileen Clark has more.
A takeaway coffee has become for many a daily purchase rather than just occasional treat. But less than 1% of these cups are recycled, and if tossed in with other rubbish, then being treated as a foodstuff, it stops that rubbish being recycled too. A House of Commons committee has decided a levy of 25p on a cup of coffee could improve all that. This member of that committee, with refillable cup in hand, says the money raised could bring special bins specifically to separate cups for recycling.
These new type of bins that people could use and could see in their high streets, in their towns and in their villages, to make sure that they put these cups into a proper recyclable dedicated bin.
It's a huge problem. We've got 208 million cups being taken by consumers every year in Scotland.
So campaigners say a 25p levy would be a start, but should go further.
It doesn't address the issue that we have with other types of cups in the litter and waste stream. For example, the one that's just down here is a cold drinks cup. So what we need to do is look at the whole aspect of how we collect it, people's behaviour, how we recycle it, and it needs to encompass all types of cup waste.
In Falkirk today, there seemed to be support for what's been dubbed the latte levy.
I actually think it's a great idea because I actually take a travel cup with me and I get them to fill that.
It's a start, yeah, but maybe I was looking for a better material to use.
You need to put it on all takeaway places, that pizza boxes and Indian takeaways where you get your polystyrene.
The 25p proposal has not gone down well with the industry though, who say that they're already working to improve recycling rates.
What is the point of charging consumers 25p, that is £430 million of their hard-earned money, for something that industry is willing to do anyway?
Here, following the success of the carrier bag levy, the Scottish Government is working on a money-back scheme on bottles and cans, and coffee cups will be next on the agenda of an expert group.
Potentially that would be one of the options on the table, is to think, could the deposit system, could that be extended to things like coffee cups, or is some other tactic better deployed for coffee cups?
The main goal, of course, is to change our behaviour so that we don't get our coffee in cups like this. Instead, we turn up with our own cup, which should be cheaper for ourselves and for the environment. Aileen Clark, reporting Scotland, Falkirk.
It's 25 years since one of Scotland's worst environmental disasters. More than 80,000 tonnes of oil was spilled into the sea when the Brer oil tanker ran aground on Shetland. A quarter of a century on, and environmental charities calling for the end of drilling in the North Sea. Rebecca Curran reports.
On this day in 1993, the Brer tanker lost power and ran aground in a storm. The impact was dramatic. Almost immediately, she began spewing her cargo of 84,000 tonnes of oil into the sea. For days on end, hurricane-force winds battered the stricken vessel. Islanders still remember it drifting towards shore.
At one stage, it was heading straight towards the Vaugh behind me with the way the wind was. But thankfully, the tide caught it as it was drifting and drove it to shore, where it did go ashore in Gasness, just at Fitful Head. So that was the beginning of I suppose, a month-long adventure that seemed to go on and on. But that was the first day, and I don't think I'll ever forget that day.
In the end, the weather came to the rescue, as much of the spill was swept out to sea. But damage had been done. Oil-soaked birds, the most visible sign. A quarter of a century on, environmentalists say the pursuit of North Sea oil continues to put wildlife in danger.
If we're to prevent future disasters of that type, what we need to do now is see a clear signal on the part of the UK government and on the Scottish government to move to a zero carbon future. The Scottish Climate Change Bill, which is coming forward in 2018 in the Scottish Parliament, is an opportunity for the Scottish government to signal that intention.
The Brer disaster has been described as a close shave in environmental terms. The UK government is responsible for preventing oil pollution. The Scottish government said its climate change targets are the most ambitious in the UK. The fear is, if there's another oil spill, next time the weather might not save the day. Rebecca Curran, reporting Scotland.
You're watching BBC Reporting Scotland. It's 17 minutes to 7. A reminder of tonight's top story. Scotland's largest teachers' union, the EIS, is calling for teachers' pay to be restored to pre-austerity levels. And still to come, the 16-year-old from East Kilbride, who's the first female driver to compete in the F4 Championship in the United Arab Emirates. The Scottish Government has announced that hundreds of millions of pounds are to be spent on extending superfast broadband to rural areas. But one scheme, using frequencies that were freed up when all TV broadcasts went digital, is already bringing better internet connections to remote communities. Craig Anderson reports.
Remember this?
Yes, it's an old-fashioned TV aerial, but the frequencies received by this old tech are now being used for a new tech application. It's called TV Whitespace. It uses redundant analogue television frequencies, and it's bringing broadband to parts other internet providers don't reach.
This is the only solution where BT can't get to you. You've probably got no mobile phone signal. You might have 3 mountains around you and not even get satellite internet, which has its own problems anyway and is very expensive. We can get to you with this technology, and the Scottish Government promised 100% of properties in Scotland would have superfast broadband, and we believe this is the only technology that can deliver that, and we're actually working with the Scottish Government on the rollout programme.
At this woodland education centre in the hills above Loch Ness, internet connections were nigh impossible on the standard phone line. And it could be years before fibre broadband reaches here, if ever. So the arrival of a fast internet service here has been nothing short of revolutionary.
If we needed to get any speedy broadband, we would have to sort of take our laptops and go into Inverness to get something speedy, or go over and have a cup of coffee in the Levitt Arms in Bewley to get a bit of speed up. So it makes a huge difference.
One of the problems of providing wireless internet broadband in rural areas is that very often the dishes or the antenna have to see each other. They rely on line of sight. With the TV Whitespace signals, though, they can actually bend round hillsides and go through forests.
It travels a very long way thanks to having a nice big wavelength which can go around trees and over rocks, and it follows that terrain, which means that actually for places like this which are a long way from the grid, it's very cheap for us to connect that up and makes it affordable broadband.
The Scottish Government wants every home and business in Scotland to have access to superfast broadband within 4 years. That's a tall order for conventional providers, especially in remote areas. So TV Whitespace could help meet that target. Craig Anderson reporting Scotland, Loch Ness.
The taxi firm Uber has been given permission to operate in Aberdeen. Uber confirmed that a licence had been granted, but said there wasn't currently a launch date for the service. The controversial taxi firm was deemed unfit to operate by Transport for London and is appealing the decision to remove its licence there. It also operates in Glasgow and Edinburgh. An investigation has concluded that a fatal house fire in Dumfries was not suspicious. It follows a joint police and fire service investigation into the cause of the blaze. 51-year-old Stuart Collis died there on Wednesday afternoon. A convicted drug trafficker killed a man in a hammer attack after the victim ran up a debt he was unable to pay. William Richardson turned up at a house in Kelty in Fife and repeatedly assaulted Colin Oliphant in a bedroom. Mr. Oliphant, who owed £200 for drugs he used himself, died shortly afterwards from chest trauma complications. Richardson later handed himself into police and admitted culpable homicide. In football, Celtic's newest recruit says being released by Rangers as a teenager has motivated him to prove people wrong. Lewis Morgan has joined the Scottish champions from St Mirren on a 4.5-year contract. The 21-year-old says he's confident of making his mark at Celtic Park, as David Curry reports.
A proud day for Lewis Morgan and his family, some of whom were watching his first media conference as a Celtic player. A big deal for someone who Rangers didn't think was good enough.
The head of youth at the time didn't take a fancy to me for one way or another, but that's all behind me now, and I'm happy to be joining a club like this. And we play Champions League football every year, and it's the most dominant team in Scotland.
21-year-old Morgan, who's scored 13 goals for St Mirren this season, is the first Scot to be signed for Celtic under Brendan Rodgers. Before he took over, a group of talented young Scots pitched up at Celtic 3 years ago. Not all of those likely lads have made an impact. Right, lads. Stuart Armstrong and Gary Mackay-Steven signed from Dundee United. Mackay-Steven becoming a fringe player at Celtic before leaving for Aberdeen last summer. Armstrong, however, is a first-team regular and now Scotland international. What about Ryan Christie? He signed from Inverness but is now on loan to Aberdeen. Standout performances there, however, have earned him a Scotland cap. Then there's Scott Allen. He joined from Hibs. He's failed to make the breakthrough at Celtic Park and is now on loan to Dundee. So what are Lewis Morgan's chances of cutting it at Celtic?
I believe that he's got the attributes to play at a higher level or at the highest level. There'll be loads of people in this country will question that because that's the way we work in Scotland and we like to be negative about our own, but I would have every confidence that he'll go on to progress in his career.
Oh, he's took a knock once before in his career when he left Rangers, and it shows he's got the mental strength to come back from that, and that's the type of player you need to be if you're going to survive at Celtic.
I know there's going to be a fight in my hands to get in the team, but I'm certainly up to it.
That fight will have to wait. Morgan's returning to St Mirren till the end of the season. David Curry, reporting Scotland, Glasgow.
It's a sport still dominated by men, but one Scottish teenager has made history by becoming the first female driver to compete in the F4 Championship in the United Arab Emirates. 16-year-old Logan Hannah has been karting since she was 12. Katie Hunter has this report.
It's something that I always carry around on my shoulders as being a female racing driver. But if it was up to me, I'd be treated just the same.
From East Kilbride to the Middle East, Logan Hannah has made motorsport history. The teenager was the first female driver to compete in the F4 UAE Championship. She didn't make the podium this time, but says it's valuable experience.
It was a great opportunity and something to be proud of and something to write down in the book that I was the first female to race in the UAE under the F4 banner.
Logan grew up in the United Arab Emirates and now lives in East Kilbride. The 16-year-old's ambitions include racing in Formula 1 or IndyCar and passing her driving test.
I'm really pushing my parents to get it done as soon as possible. Or the moment I turn 17, I'll be doing a crash course, doing my lessons and trying to get on the road as quickly as possible.
Motorsport is dominated by men. Logan has been karting since she was 12 and hopes her achievements so far will encourage other girls into racing. And as for any sexism in the sport...
I mean, drive like a girl, it's what you are. Drive. I mean, if you're faster than the boy, then tell the boys to drive like a girl.
This girl is relying on talent to take her to the top. Katie Hunter, reporting Scotland.
The world's longest-running women's weekly magazine, The People's Friend, is launching a campaign to find out more about its readers ahead of its 150th anniversary celebrations. Our arts correspondent Pauline McLean has been to Dundee to find out more.
Since it first began in 1869, The People's Friend has always been a practical magazine.
This wonderful new scissor sharpener is presented with The People's Friend.
It began as an offshoot of another popular publication, The People's Journal.
That was generating so much fiction content and consumer-led kind of content that was being written by its readers that they thought, we've got too much, what should we do with it? So they thought, we'll do The People's Friend as an accompaniment to The People's Journal, and the monthly magazine was born from there.
Within a year, it had become a weekly magazine in its own right, and now the longest-running women's magazine in the world.
We still have half of all our content is fiction, and the magazine is really well known and loved for the quality and quantity of short stories and serials that it prints. So we have stayed true to our founding principles, but we have been able to move with the times too.
The magazine is also famous for its cover landscape, created first in 1946 by the artist J. Campbell Kerr. These days there are 4 artists working under that pseudonym, including Margaret MacLeod on the Isle of Lewis.
People ask me why is my name not on the cover. I'm quite happy with my name not being on the cover. And there are lots of people, I'm sure, in this village that don't even know that I do this. They ask me, what do you do since you came home? How do you pass the time? And I tell them, oh, we didn't know that.
With the 150th anniversary coming up, the magazine want to reach out to friends of the friend. They're launching an appeal, and this time it's the readers who get to tell their stories. From the lady who's been reading the magazine for the best part of a century, to the cameraman in the Congo in the 1930s, who was saved from a stampeding rhino by a free gift from the People's Friend.
He went back afterwards to see what he had fallen on, and it was a squashed metal box that said on the side, presented with the People's Friend. Now we're assuming that was one of our tea caddies that we gave away as competition prizes in those days.
There is one for every household.
Pauline McLean, reporting Scotland, Dundee.
Let's go to our people's friend now. Get the weather from Chris.
Sally, thank you. Hello there, good evening to you. Well, a cold and icy night ahead. In fact, we have a Met Office yellow be aware warning in force because at the moment we have a number of showers moving south across the country, wintry over the hills, perhaps some sleet to lower levels, but with the ground wet and the temperature dropping, a risk of ice. So that Met Office warning in force for slippery surfaces. And it will be a cold night, temperatures down close to freezing even in towns and cities, lower than that in the countryside and breezy too from the northeast. But for the weekend, change afoot. Recently, we've had low pressure dominating conditions, but it's starting to slip out of the way with high pressure muscling in from the north, quietening things down. It means a couple of dry, sunny, crisp, but cold days. And certainly a cold start to the day tomorrow. Once again, some icy patches around. A little more cloud across eastern areas with 1 or 2 wintry flurries, but for most of us, it's a bright, sunny, crisp Saturday. But it will be chilly. Temperatures by mid-afternoon, perhaps just 3 to 5 Celsius at best. And certainly where we have that cloud towards parts of the borders, maybe the Lothians, a few wintry flurries here, it will be quite a cool feel to the day. Similar too across parts of the northeast, with a breeze coming in from the northeast as well. Quite a raw feel. Elsewhere though, the wind's lighter, plenty of sunshine, a crisp day. And certainly some sunshine coming through across parts of the far north, maybe 1 or 2 flurries across parts of Sutherland and Caithness as well. So if you're hill walking or climbing, fantastic visibility up on the hills, out with any cloud. But temperatures there on the summits well below freezing, so a significant wind chill with those winds coming in from the northeast, although the winds tend to ease through the afternoon. A few flurries likely through the Cairngorms and indeed through the border hills at times as well. Now, the rest of the afternoon into the evening and overnight, the showers fade, the winds fall light, and the temperatures drop like a stone. It will be a very cold night, Saturday to Sunday, a severe frost. Temperatures in towns and cities, -3, -4. A few spots in the Central Highlands, -13 is possible. So a cold start to Sunday, but high pressure still with us, so another dry, fine one in store. Plenty of sunshine around. A little more cloud, though, for the Western Isles and the Northern Isles, and a stronger wind here, so not quite as chilly. Temperatures here, perhaps 5 or 6 Celsius. Elsewhere, though, it will be another cold day, but a bright, sunny, crisp one. And come Monday, that high pressure starting to slip away, but it's a slow process, so we should get away with another dry day and perhaps not quite as cold. That's the forecast, Sally.
Thanks so much, Chris. Now a reminder of tonight's main news. With the serial sex attacker John Warboys due to be released from prison imminently, the chair of the parole board has apologised unreservedly to victims after some of them were not told. Scotland's largest teachers' union, the EIS, has said it's preparing to look at industrial action and has called for pay to be restored to pre-austerity levels. And that's Reporting Scotland. I'll be back with the headlines at 8 and the late bulletin just after the 10 o'clock news. Until then, from everyone in the team, have a very good evening. Bye-bye.